Yay, Manoj.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi, awesome.
Hi.
Awesome. It's great. We're all here. It looks like we have some participants rolling in, which is really exciting, guys. We're just going to take a few more minutes to get a few more people in here. But holy bananas, what a crazy time it is in the world. It is remarkable to be business owners during this time. And I think what's really exciting is that all of us here that are panelists that are all engaging in this conversation are also business owners. So not only are we advising and working with business owners, we are also business owners who have to weather this storm as well. And I think that that makes this a very unique opportunity for us to not only speak empathically from where we stand as business owners, but also from what we're seeing out there in the market. It's been officially for myself a full week of being in self-quarantined. I'm sure a lot of people are taking similar precautions. But as these panelists are getting settled, as everyone's kind of attending, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time today. I know that there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of people who are saying lots of things, and getting information from people who are living it, experiencing it, and in the trenches, I think is the best thing that we can be doing. So I want to thank each of you guys, my lovely panelists, for joining me today. This was very last minute, but I couldn't think of a better crew of people to shed some insight and light onto what's happening. So before we launch into the state of what's happening in the world, what we're seeing in terms of businesses today, I'll let you guys each introduce yourselves. But just to refresh you guys, the panel today is consistent of legal, we have sourcing, we have operations, community, we have public relations on hand. A lot of the questions that you have, let's say, that are geared towards specifically financing or fundraising, those types of things, feel free to send them over. We may or may not get to those particular questions. At the end of today's webinar, we will be sending out a list of resources and ways in which you can activate further communication with our panelists today, because each of them, I think, has a lot to offer. You know, the webinar will be uploaded with YouTube at the end, so you guys will get a chance to do a repeat, and we hope to be able to continue these conversations going forward. So I will announce you guys as I see you on my end of the webinar. I don't know how you see the lineup, but I will go ahead and like to get started with Deanne from Avant Collective.
Hi, everybody. My name is Deanne Yee, and I'm one of the co-founders and partners of Avant Collective. We're based in New York and LA, and we work with a broad range of clients across fashion and lifestyle.
Thank you, Deanne. Nicole.
Which one?
Not Nikki, but Nicole.
Oh right. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Giordano. I'm the founder of Startup Fashion, and we are an online business resource and community that supports independent startup fashion designers as they're building their businesses.
Nikki.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Rary. We're going to call me Nikki for less confusion. I own the Apparel Agency, which is a sourcing, design development, and production management agency for existing and startup brands.
Yeah. And Manoj.
Hi, everyone. This is Manoj Shah. I'm a partner with Brand Counsel PC, located in Los Angeles, California. We're business lawyers. We provide legal services to entrepreneurs, executives, and startups, and provide services to the to small businesses. Yeah, here we go.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. So guys, just to kind of quickly lay the land, you know, in a recent statistic, we saw that there are, you know, over 30 million small businesses here in the US, which represents 99% of businesses. And when we think about the scope of small business, we really find that they're really categorized as businesses that are 500 people and less, right? So that kind of broad range of scope encapsulates a lot of different kinds of businesses. Particular on today's call, I think we're really speaking to an audience that has companies of maybe 1, 2, 10 people, maybe 20 people, but we're not looking at audiences that have 500 people who are employed. So I think our narrow and our focus is very much for that founder CEO and that person who is really trying to understand, how do I keep my eye on everything that's going on all at once? As of this morning, we've seen some interesting news. You guys have been paying attention, I'm sure, The White House worked to finalize the details of a $1 trillion stimulus plan. So that's going to include small business loans that are designed to help us keep our inventory being ordered. It's designed to help us keep people employed. As far as where we're going to find access to those resources, guys, the Small Business Association, and again, like I mentioned before, we're going to have a lot of resources that we can send out to you guys so you can further get some insight on funding and how that's going to be working. The Small Business Association, the different categories that they're going to be focusing on have to do by state. And so the states that they're really focusing on right now are Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, the District of Columbia, and Florida. So it doesn't mean that other states won't get the opportunity to engage in these loans, but those are the ones specifically that we're seeing a lot of funding go towards. So again, address the funding conversation later, but I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about cash flow at this moment. And that's kind of the latest update on cash flow. We're also seeing companies like Facebook, et cetera, being able right now to come out with small business grants. We're hoping that it's going to be a combined effort between the government and corporations who are able to do so. So let's hope all of those kind of expeditiously come into play. Just a few groundkeeping rules, guys. Once again, please make sure to add your questions in the chat. We're going to have moderation happening. We'll do our best to field them to the appropriate people. If we're unable to get to it during this time period, we'll bookend them and hopefully have them answered in the future. But I'd like to kind of open up the conversation. Nicole, you've had your eye on community, right? You have a huge community base. You're probably hearing so much that's happening with what's on people's mind. Can you please give us an overview? What is your community saying? What are they worried about? What's on the top?
Yeah, so it's in two different directions. I've got my community who haven't launched yet, and so they are really worried around production stalling. You know, they've invested so much so far, and they're really concerned about moving forward with that. Everything is at a standstill, and those conversations aren't happening. The other part of the community are the ones that have launched and are concerned about sales. They're worried about continuing getting those sales beyond this initial, like lockdown. So there is a lot of talk right now around people are home and shopping, and there's truth to that. Right now, people are home and shopping, and so they're saying how some of the influencers that they're working with are having actually an uptick in their affiliate sales, which is an exciting thing. But they said that they're worried beyond that. Okay, we're in lockdown. Yes, right now people are focused on because they're bored, so they're online if they're lucky and healthy. But what about after that point? And as we enter into the recession, how to keep those going? So there's a lot of conversation around that. But what has been so beautiful to see is how they're coming together, cross-promoting each other, working together in that way. And so the discussion has also been around that. How do we come together as small businesses who are all in this together and help one another? And so that's a big part of the conversation too.
Got it. That's a really interesting climate take. And Nikki, as far as on the sourcing side, what's your climate been so far?
So far, we haven't had much disruption. We work primarily with startups and emerging brands. So they're right on the cusp of either launching their first collection or, a sophomore, junior collection. They oftentimes have more than one production taking place. Maybe some of our more larger clients might have production happening at various factories, but all of them have at least half a dozen to a dozen suppliers in their supply chain, and we haven't had any disruption thus far. I think the India is on lockdown, and so what the lockdown is doing for most people as it's evolving is it's not necessarily completely locking everyone down. They're finding solutions. The interesting part about sewing is machines can travel anywhere. So for an example, our sample sewers are working from home. We just set them up with machines, and we just kind of readjust our the way that we're working. But it doesn't mean that people cannot go to work. So the sample sewers are still active as far as I can tell at all of our resources. Production may be slowed, but we're having conversations, getting on top of the production conversations. What happens when the lockdowns are lifted? What's the climate of staff returning to work? How are you going to ramp up? Who's first in line, and what are the priorities of the brands in terms of the delay? And those conversations thus far have been really positive. We're looking at 2 to 4 week delays. And we're really encouraging brands not to have a panic attack, but to be very strategic, to have conversations. Maybe you need to have plan A, B, and C, and to just be easy on yourself, because this will, this too shall pass is what I keep saying. It too shall pass. And one thing we don't encourage you to do is completely give up or completely delay or just stop everything, because there will be a rush. Once everything starts to come back around, everybody's going to be in line, and then that's where the pipeline is going to clog. And so we need to just find ways to keep steady and keep the pace as we get through it.
Got it. It's an interesting perspective on how there's going to be a backlog and a clog kind of when things do come back into play. I don't think a lot of people have been considering that. Deanne, with your clients on the PR side of things, have you been noticing, or just communication, working with press, editorial, what's happening in your world?
Yeah, so we have been finding that our clients have had to really pivot their messaging and think about where people are right now, and just get real, have human to human interactions with their customers. We actually have reached out to our editors to kind of get our editors and influencer base to kind of get a gauge on where people are right now. Are they covering stories that are non-COVID-19 related? How are they dealing with the shift? And basically, everyone's kind of, I think, this past week realized that this is the new reality, and for a short while. And so, they're having to really, I think, rethink their messaging, and even in some ways, how can they accommodate more for that, like, at-home lifestyle, at least in the short term.
Got it. Interesting. And Manoj, kind of on the legal side of things, what are you noticing as far as anything that's happening within your community or your clients right now? What are they most concerned about?
The questions are twofold. They're, how do I keep my employees safe? And how do I keep my business going, keeping them safe? And the other end of that is, given the mandatory quarantines, how do I lay my people off and make sure that they're taken care of from a financial perspective moving forward? Those are the two primary sort of areas that people are asking a lot of questions in. And I think the situation is really fluid right now, given every day it's a new sort of mandatory sort of quarantine. Different industries are being affected differently. So one of my clients last night, I was on the phone with him until about 11 p.m. trying to figure out, he's a furniture wholesaler, and he gets a lot of his goods delivered to the ports. And those ports, they transport the goods to his facility using containers. He has to unload those containers and get those containers back to the ports. Otherwise, he's going to be responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and penalties. Beyond that, those containers need to be back at the port so that they can help transport medical supplies. So how, in a mandatory quarantine where certain workplaces are being shut down, does he continue to operate, unload the containers, and get the containers back, trying to follow the new mandate?
Was there an answer to that?
There's an answer to that. He's going to, based on and this is for the city of LA specifically, the mayor's directive essentially allowed essential businesses to remain open, and for delivery services such as his, even though it's furniture, to remain open during the mandatory quarantine. So he's got to implement certain measures, administrative as well as engineering sort of controls while at the facility for his workers to keep them safe. But he is allowed to stay open and do what he needs to do to unload the containers and get the containers back to the port.
Got it. So it's a very case by case kind of situation as far as how to be managing things. It sounds like a time where good relationships are really kind of coming into play. So guys, I'm going to open this up to a lot of questions. I have quite a few. I'll do my best not to make them redundant. A lot of people have the same questions, so we'll see if we can combine them all together. Just to kind of give the lay of the land. There are a lot of questions around panic. And I think that we all kind of collectively agree here that this is not the future. This is the right now. And I think in terms of being in a climate where we see, what is the new normal, I think it's also really important to remember that. And to your point, Nikki, I think it's important to remember that, right now, as of today, New York, California is on a total state shutdown. Everyone's staying at home, 40 million people. That's certainly a short-term phase. When we're thinking about how this is playing out, I think it's really important to be looking at future plans, but also, what is right in front of us. And as of right now, the most recent date I see is, mid-April. So we're looking at 4 weeks, right? So it's not only what is going on with my business in the next 6 months or the next year, but what can I be doing in my business in these next 4 weeks until business kind of returns to be normal. And so I'd like to kind of open up some of that kind of shorter, more what can we wrap our hands around before we kind of open it up to, oh my gosh, this might be the next 6 months, which we actually do not know to be for certain. All we know is these next 4 weeks, we have very specific deliverables. So Nicole, I'd love to kind of open it up and get some thoughts on how you are advising and thinking about what should we be thinking about for these next 4 weeks?
Yeah, sure. So a few things that come to mind is, or are, certainly be thinking about how you're connecting with your customer or your audience right now in a way like creatively. So what are the ways that the brands I see who are doing well right now, like with their mindset, like keeping calm and seeing, understanding that this won't be forever, are the ones that have really cultivated a real connection over time with their customer. And now they feel really supported by this audience and customer. And so there's a lot going from them out to their audience to just stay connected. So as an example, one of our members, her brand is called Poppy Row, and she is bringing a pop of happiness to people. And the way she's doing that tonight is she's hosting a Facebook, it's a movie night using Facebook Watch Party with her audience. So she picked a movie, they're all going to watch a movie together, and she's keeping the conversation going. She's keeping front of mind. She's like going to them where they are, which is stuck at home and bored and, all of that. So really thinking about how you can be deepening those connections with your audience now for when things do get back to normal and they are, buying regularly again and all of those things. The other thing to be thinking about, like if you haven't really spent a lot of time polishing that website and making e-commerce a real focus for you, use this time to get familiar with Google Analytics, how they work, where your customers are coming from, so that you're like creating a plan for reaching them later. Do a refresh of your website, update your product descriptions, review your email marketing strategy, like how are you communicating with them? That can be one of those things that always seems to be on the back burner, but now is a good time to like give that a look. What is that series you send out? What do your funnels look like? Really work on them now, because when this gets back, when life gets back to normal, you will be a step ahead in having done all of this rather than kind of panicking and feeling like I don't know what to do. I would say also things you can be doing now too, if you do need to be making sales in the moment, because people are at home buying, start cross-promoting with aligned brands. I have seen so much of that in the independent community that is the community of all my designers, and all of this beautiful cross-promotion and coming together for different ideas to get the word out about one another. I think start leaning. If you're part of an online community, if you have connection to other designers now, get into conversations with them now about what you can be doing for and with one another to weather this initial storm. So the other thing is, I really want to emphasize this one, is getting out there and like, let your people see your face and hear your voice. And I know that that's something that a lot of brands like, oh, I don't like to be on Instagram stories. I don't want to do it. They need to see you and hear you right now. And if you're going to keep that connection going and remain in a good place for when things, get back to normal, you really need to be strengthening that connection. And an important way to do that is to get out from behind the camera and get in front of it and really talk to them. So those are some of the first things that come to mind.
Amazing. I'd love to piggyback off of the communication component, Deanne, as far as like how you're seeing your clients or kind of your ideas here on, communicating messaging. It sounds like, obviously there's a direct to consumer, get on the newsletter and talk to people. What are the kinds of messages that you are seeing that really land, or the kinds of messaging that you're seeing is the most warm to the public?
You mean in terms of outgoing marketing communications,
Yep.
Chatting with your customers?
Yeah, what are some do's and don'ts? Because I have a feeling here, there might be some like, hey, let's, is it the time to start showing your dog, when we just told them all like, hey, don't clog your Instagram feed with like pictures of your grandma. And now it's like, okay, it's time to get personal. So like, how do we, what is the right transition here? How can brands maybe who haven't necessarily built that communication or built that history, that are now starting to realize I need to do this now, right? Or how do I pitch and position myself? What is the right protocol here?
I think one of the first things that people do need to keep in mind is that they need to acknowledge that this is going on, that this is the reality. They need to, I think, empathize with how people are living now, and kind of keep that balanced view in mind when they're putting together any sort of communication, whether it's an Instagram post, or whether it's an email newsletter, whether it's, a press release that they're sending out to media. It's basically, what is your brand's positioning in this time? How can, acknowledge the reality of it, and don't, I think I've gotten some tone deaf newsletters from some brands where they're saying, hey, you're staying home, like you should be buying this like crazy, like something that's just not relevant to how people are living now. I think people need to acknowledge the reality of it. And then also, I think people also want to know, to get an idea of what your brand stands for in this time, and have a sense of humor about it as well too, because I think people need some levity right now. And I think some of our clients, for instance, one of our clients that is doing really well right now is called We Are Knitters. They sell these knitting kits, and they come packaged to people's homes so that they can like make something. So there's a huge like, the trend right now is for people to be able to keep themselves occupied at home. So how can you kind of use that as a jump off point for your brand if there's some relevancy? Yeah.
Interesting. What's funny is when we're thinking about, I was talking to someone earlier about like, it's not that people aren't spending anymore, it's that they're buying different things. So actually, when you think about like economic shift, it's like, yes, certain categories are going down, but like you mentioned, people are at home. So guess what? They're buying other stuff. So when you think about those athleisure brands that are like, really honing in on like that loungewear market, I mean, look, if we're home for 3 weeks, you're going to be revamping your closet and stuff. You're going to be doing something, right? It's like we live in this like consumer world. We're not in like a post-consumer country, right? We're very much so active, high high purchasing spend. And so I think what's interesting, what you brought up, is it's really true. It's not necessarily people are home, which means that their consumer shifting is going to spend, right, and how they're looking to purchase.
I've also seen kind of a shift. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
I've seen a shift in terms of like people wanting to like look good on their Zoom meetings, you know. So you're still going to have people that want to buy things to look good and feel good.
Yeah.
I was just reading how activewear is making kind of a comeback. It was so saturated and then downtrending for the last year to 2 years in terms of development. And now it's actually, expected to pick back up because of all, obviously can't go to the gym anymore, but that doesn't mean people don't want to work out. So they're going to be working out in groups, working out with, the mirror thing and the various other ways to work out online and in a community. So in terms of product categories that you may want to look into, adding into your line, or kind of getting that perfect legging or something, you might want to consider something like that.
Awesome. And Nicole, what were you going to say?
I was just going to add, thinking about where the fact that people are not spending in places like entertainment. So now that money gets to shift to things that they can get, right? They're not going to the movies. They're not going out to dinner. They're not spending on entertainment. So think about the opportunity there too. And that can help with a positive mindset a little bit, because they're not spending in some other areas, and that might shift to product.
Absolutely. And I think the consumer, the category shifting. So Nicole, you and I were chatting the other day about expanding categories and, why brands should be looking into other categories and becoming a real lifestyle brand. And this certainly poses an opportunity for brands to think in terms of other category investments and how they might be able to represent and be more, given that dollars are shifting. Awesome. Okay. So let me move into a couple questions here. One that I have here on the legal side has to do with employment issues to consider. So obviously, I would say that one of our most vulnerable markets in this country is our independent contractor, kind of market. So many people are independent contractors. We've seen the rise of the gig economy. Everyone's kind of fractional this, and they have 30 different things they're doing, and so the labor market has shifted considerably. More people want to be independent contractors than full-time employees. Holy bananas, now people are looking to let go of budgets. Independent contractors are really some of the first to go, but what does this mean in terms of employment? How should our brands be looking at their contracts with either their full-time employees, what to think about in terms of independent contractors?
That's a very broad question, and I think it's
sorry.
I think it's been a problem, at least with respect to the law change in California, in that it's really difficult now for companies to hire independent contractors, even when you state in a contract that the person is an independent contractor. The way that cases are assessed with the Labor Commission now changes everything. So, for instance, if an independent contractor provides a service that the company is actually known to do, it could potentially be considered a misclassification of that person if you classify them as an independent contractor versus an employee, so that you get out of paying the proper wages and overtime that they're entitled to, and providing them with workers' compensation insurance and things of that nature. So I guess to answer your question, like what happens to independent contractors now that the virus is like in full effect, and new mandates have come down to restrict certain businesses from staying open. I think, it's going to be challenging for them, because independent contractors are not necessarily entitled to unemployment, whereas other employees that are W-2 employees of companies can file for unemployment if they're laid off. I think that I think it's really kind of fluid still in terms of what can happen with independent contractors, because if they have been misclassified as independent contractors and they don't know, and they go in to apply for unemployment, that could potentially get the employer in trouble if they've misclassified them. So the relief as it relates to independent contractors and people that are running their own businesses, I think is very limited from the state and federal perspective, because they've been kind of flying on their own for a minute. And in terms of classifying them now, or people wanting to do wanting to hire independent contractors, I think it would be incumbent upon them to understand how the state views independent contractors and what the rules and requirements are for them to be independent contractors. Are they really providing a service that's independent of the company that's hiring them? Is the threshold. It's not just, do they maintain a level of control over them?
I see. So almost as if like this is an important time to clean house in terms of what are my employment contracts looking like right now? Are these independent contractors truly independent, or are they not? And I think for the brands out there that have been hiring independent contractors, some of the advice that at least we've been sharing is, find ways that certainly no one wants to get in trouble for misclassifications or having to pay in arrears, any sort of taxation or getting in trouble. I do think that at least from what I've been seeing, a lot of brands who are hiring independent contractors, whether or not they're classified correctly or not, the way in which they've been kind of moving through or navigating this has been really on the side of, okay, how can we renegotiate our labor or renegotiate in such a way where either you're still performing the same work at a lower rate, or we're finding some way to be able to kind of keep things operational, I guess, is kind of, what we've been advising, at least in the interim until it's more clear.
One of the things that I've been advising, and just to piggyback on the things that you've said, because I think those are good, is that you create a grid of the core services that your business provides and make those the core services that you hire employees for. And anything that falls outside of the scope of your core services are what you hire independent contractors for, and negotiate those contracts separately. That way there's some sort of background for why you did what you did, instead of the state coming back and saying you misclassified this person. This is exactly what your company does. They shouldn't have been classified as an independent contractor. Got
it. That's very interesting. Are you seeing outside of California that there are other kinds of other states that are cracking down on these independent contractor labor laws?
Yeah, I think that California was one of the biggest jurisdictions to fall under this new test. Prior to this case coming down, I think it was in 2017 was when everything started to really shift. But prior to that, other states had been operating under this system that California just adopted. So I think other states have been aware, and they've been trying to prevent people from hiring independent contractors in the way that they've been hired in the past, by making it more restrictive. Got it. Okay. Thank you. That's really, it's good to have a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer. So I'm like, hey, here's what I think. But, it's like, it's good to have a lawyer, guys. If you guys need a lawyer, have a lawyer. Okay, so let's move on to some other questions here. We have a question here from Brianna. She's a growth stage company. This question is two-pronged. Her question is about sourcing domestically and or from other countries. And then her second part of this question is hiring and protecting employees or contractors from a crisis such as COVID-19. And the second part of that question, I'm not 100% clear on, but in terms of understanding, let's say, Nikki, that there is, a brand right now is, in the early stages of development. So I think there's kind of multiple ways we can look at this, but let's say early stages of development of their brand. Originally at this point in time, they're thinking about manufacturing internationally. And then they're like, oh my gosh, all this is happening. Now I want to switch gears and start to turn my attention to sourcing and producing domestically in the US. Is this a good idea to all of a sudden switch your manufacturing strategy based on something like this? Is that big enough? And how are you advising and kind of looking at sourcing and manufacturing?
Sure. It's a great question. we typically approach sourcing and development with a domestic view. So no matter what your end production goal is, whether you're onshore, whether you're offshore, nearshoring, we're always looking at how to build your line to allow you to have the supply chain and the resources to be able to do multifaceted production, whether it be contractors, domestic, small batches and runs, on scaling on up to large manufacturing. A lot of times new brands, they have a mindset of go directly to the factory, and they kind of get caught in this trap where they go to factories who are production driven, and they say, yeah, we can develop that for you. But then those factories are finding resources, supply, materials, trims. The brand doesn't own the sources. They don't own. And so what happens is when you get a clog in that, factory, if the factory stops communicating, if something like a crisis occurs and you're not, hearing from your factory, now you're scrambling to say, well, what do I do? And so it's always important, I think, I know, to source and develop your line and know exactly where everything is coming from, so that you can manage on a micro level and you can pivot and you can turn where you need to. In terms of where things are at right now, I do think that if you have the ability and you don't have too much tied up into your current manufacturing situation, some creative things that we're looking at doing with brands is to restructure their payment plans. A lot of manufacturers are going, typically will take a deposit up front, and then they'll maybe do a progress payment along the way, and then some balance payment upon receipt. We're doing a restructuring. It's called payment plans that are ready to ship. So whenever something is ready to ship, and you can break it down into by style, color, several styles, reprioritizing, remerchandising, and getting your manufacturing to mirror what your new sales initiatives are, what your new marketing strategy is. Just taking a different, kind of putting on a different lens for what you need to do in order to be the most relevant to your consumer as you start to come out of this, and then asking the factories and the suppliers to work with you. The truth of the matter is there's a lot of small local contractors and sewers that don't have a voice. They're not savvy in marketing, and maybe it's digging in and trying to find those people and breaking it down, breaking down your operations and just looking for the community and the local resources that you weren't previously looking to. Domestic suppliers, as far as I can tell, they're all being very, community driven. They're working on minimizing some of their otherwise higher minimums. Maybe they're going to give you some payment terms. If they're a larger company, they might have the ability to, give you terms that they weren't giving before, help you out with all kinds of different, I think the most important thing is now is not the time, again, to shut down. Now's the time to get really active. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to be, transparent about where you're at in your business, and look to your supply chain, to your manufacturers for support, and really just get creative.
I think that's a great point. I think the idea of us coming together, as opposed to, this idea, I know Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, and she talks about it more like, we're all on our cell phones and no one's talking to each other. And now I feel like it kind of spins that phrase on its head. It's like we are literally alone, but together, and we have to get creative and find ways of being able to do business creatively. I think that is, I think that's important. I kind of want to shift that a little bit in terms of how we're doing business creatively, and kind of think about, the markets in which that might be the most relevant, So I'd say, when it comes to the kinds of categories and brands that people are putting out there, and I want to open this up to all of you guys who might have a perspective on this, but, there was a huge rise of luxury brands, these kind of small direct to consumer, high price point brands. everyone's coming out with small batch, and things are, things have an elevated price point, and there's quality and integrity, and there's reasons behind that. But certainly the rise of these more advanced contemporary luxury brands are coming up. And I have an interesting question here from Taya, and she's, launching in the next 6 to 12 months. She says, I'm concerned with my supply chain that is mostly in Europe and Asia, slow sales and market, disinterested in luxury goods in the time of a recession. I opened a few accounts with high-end retailers in the last 2 months, but wholesale has come to a halt now that everyone is waiting to see what the stock market and COVID are going to do. My production is fairly small, but the goods are expensive, and I can only offer so many items for consignment. So this, I think, is kind of a multiple pronged question, which is, number one, how do I manage my relationships with my retailers during this point in time? And, I'm happy to chime in and offer some insights. I'd love to hear what you guys think on that. Also, how do I manage my supply chain right now, where I'm already locked into something that's mostly in Europe? And then also, how do I kind of manage the notion of where the luxury market is heading, right? Not only from I would say, and I think, Deanne, you might have some insight on here into terms of, Vogue is somewhere we would always go to find luxury brands. Is that going to even matter anymore, right? Like, are we going to say, all right, like, are things going to shift drastically? Should small luxury brands be concerned about the appetite for their products in the market? Who would like to take this on first?
I start just with the supply chain, just as it applies to what we were previously saying. I think that she should communicate with her factory and see if she can do more of an as-ready delivery, as something that I think the biggest thing for everybody right now is a fear of nothing versus a fear of restructuring. So I would much prefer for a client to say to me, how do we get through this together, versus, okay, so long, see you. And I think a factory would probably, or supplier would probably prefer that as well. So again, being transparent, saying, this is where I'm at. How do we just alter this in order for me not to stop my order, but to find a way for you to get paid and for me to be able to sell and to be able to move my inventory through this time. I mean, it has to be a win-win for everybody involved.
Sure. And Nicole, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, in terms of, this idea of luxury, I mean, I've done a little bit of research on this, and I feel like what I've been really understanding is that luxury doesn't usually suffer too much in the time of a recession. However, the kind of luxury shifts. So there tends to be less flashiness. So if your pieces are luxury but have a timelessness, you are probably going to be okay. The other thing that happens is a desire for something special without being flashy. So if your pieces bring something extra special to the picture, you're probably going to be okay. So I don't think it's the category, but thinking more like what you're designing, what these collections in the next couple of seasons are going to look like at a time when people with money still have it to spend, but maybe don't want to make that as obvious. And, when things aren't, great for everybody else. So I wouldn't want anyone who's doing luxury to feel like they just shouldn't anymore, but it's thinking about what you're creating.
And I'd have to say this luxury question has popped up at least half a dozen times. So I think from a consumer spending perspective, I think that's really important. Deanne, in terms of like influencers and editorial and, fashion, right? When we think of fashion, we don't, yes, we've seen the rise of less expensive direct-to-consumer brands, but in terms of the kind of the market readiness and how we're seeing that communication pull through, what are you noticing, and what do you think we should be anticipating?
Well, I mean, I think, as we spoke about before, this is the now, but it's not necessarily where things are going in the future. From talking to editors at luxury publications, they are focusing on the normal past summer. It's not like that they're anticipating. I mean, maybe things will shift, but they are planning to continue to push luxury and dresses and shoes and bags and, you know, the life as usual for these publications. But the now, which is short-term online, is pulling back a little bit and focusing more on cozy at-home things. So that's, I mean, in my view, I think that, you know, this overall, this long-term trend, which we saw for fashion pushing for sustainability and wanting things that last, you know, quality things, I think we'll continue to see that trend. I mean, in my view, I think that's the long-term view, at least.
Got it. You know, there's, and when it comes to things like, you know, luxury and obviously touching and feeling the product, and, you know, a lot of luxury brands, and certainly out of our office before COVID-19, we were telling everyone, experiential, get out there, meet people, touch your product, feel it. Like, this is the time to like be front and center. I can't tell you guys how many times people will be like, well, what's part of the marketing strategy? I'm like, you got to get your face out there. You got to say hi. Holy bananas. You can't do that anymore, right? It's like, there's no,
Right.
Every single event, every single craft fair, things like a West Coast Craft and all of these major market experiential opportunities that I think we've all been just so excited about and really kind of bridging human connection. It has suffered tremendously. You know, obviously the most immediate places have been in entertainment and, you know, Coachella and all of these marketing opportunities where these brands have been looking, how do I seed influencers into Coachella? How do I develop the strategy to capture more Instagram impressions during these big festivals and big events? What kinds of opportunities are there right now for brands who were planning on spending a lot of money on, you know, these in-person activations, pop-up shops, you know, really making a big concerted effort to be on the ground? You know, I always say, meet people where they're at. You gotta go meet them.
Yeah.
What can people be doing today to be able to reallocate that marketing spend? So obviously there are two things happening, right? It's like, how do I mitigate excess expenditures? But now what do I do during this time period with those resources to be able to, you know, use arbitrage and really get ahead of it? So Deanne, what are some thoughts here on not doing pop-up shops in person and going to Coachella?
I think there's a lot of opportunity to be creative with digital. You know, we're just seeing that come out now with Zoom parties and, you know, using your social media platforms to connect with your customers and like create these moments of connection with everybody and the public. I think, you know, I think there's an opportunity to kind of fill that gap in entertainment too, because I think eventually we'll see like less content coming from like the, you know, the stream, because maybe they're not, you know, maybe they're pausing on filming. So there's a lot of opportunity there to entertain and engage with your audience, I think. I don't have specific ideas for events in mind, but I know that we are actively brainstorming with our clients about ways that we can engage, you know, in a digital format.
Awesome. You know, and I loved what Nicole said before about like the Netflix party. What are some of the other creative ways in which you think business owners can engage in a way that feels more connected?
So yeah, I find it's been really cool to see how quickly brands are getting up on like Instagram Live and, okay, I can't do this pop-up next week or next month or whatever it was. So pop-up is coming to you right here. And the like honesty about it, like, yeah, this is not as cool as being able to do this in person, right? And I know you guys are feeling it, but I want to bring you these products. And then, you know, the brands that aren't set up online yet, setting up a Venmo account and saying, Venmo me, it's yours, you know, that kind of thing. Like quickly, just, okay, how can we move this stuff? I've seen brands doing things like the pay what you wish thing, where you come up with 3 possible prices for something if you have older inventory you want to move. And it's like, statistics show that they almost always choose the middle one. So figure out your numbers, have a low end, a high end, and a middle, and you can do something fun like that. I think that adding that level of entertainment or that like gamifying, for lack of a better word, can be something that adds a little bit of something extra to just shopping. I've seen brands styling stuff themselves, like being their own model. And it sounds so basic, but there is there's just like a genuineness in that and a charm in that when you're like, okay, so this is my dress and I'm wearing it with this scarf and this scarf is vintage. So you won't be able to have this scarf exactly, but and that I've just been watching these brands do that and it's been really magical. So those are some of the things I've been seeing in creative ideas.
So are you pro QVC, or are we saying, yes, this is the time for everyone to hop on QVC and try to land that deal? Or are we saying, no, we still don't really love QVC, but do it on Instagram first?
Personally, I feel like QVC may be right for some brands, and I'm not going to shame anybody who wants to do that. But I think you can make your own version of it that is much more personal and much more higher end and much more of that, like continuing that personal connection, like building on the idea of watching a movie together. Like, okay, what does that look like in terms of actually making sales? So maybe Friday night it's a movie together, and then, Sunday afternoon, your own QVC style higher end version of it on Instagram.
Got it. I love that. I think, as we continue to find new ways of engaging with customers, the thing that I think is so important is the audience that you've built right now this is the time to leverage them and to work with them. And for a lot of businesses out there who maybe haven't been focusing on community or focusing on those connections, who have been overly reliant on paid digital advertisements to drive traffic, this is a time where digital ad spends are actually going to increase, I believe, as a lot of companies are going to take that event marketing spend and reinvest that into digital properties. And guess what? Small businesses tend to be the first to suffer when digital ad spend and like cost of conversion goes up. And so, if you don't have that established community or connection where you can actually get in front of them for free because you've spent time building that relationship, the cost of conversion of onboarding someone who's going to experience your brand for the first time is going to be quite challenging. So I think that for brands that have not created that community, there's no better time to start than today. No better time to start. And it's also a time, I think, to anticipate some higher costs on digital ad spends.
It's interesting. Actually, I would love to, it's really interesting to hear you say that, because my thought on it was actually the opposite, that's opportunity in ads would actually go up for smaller businesses, because and this is just my assumption, that larger companies who are feeling this more than small businesses in terms of like sales, just right. Like if you're a small business not making a ton of sales right now anyway, the percentage that you're dropping is much different than bigger companies. And so my thought was like, okay, all of those ad spends in bigger companies are going to be pulled back. And now it's your time as a small business to get in there. And that was just my assumption, but it's interesting to hear your perspective on that. And I guess it's more of a like, I guess we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks.
Totally. I mean, I also think it comes down to just like the volume of dollars. It's like, even if a big company has like $250,000 to spend on an ad, it's like, okay, like, all right, small business, like, how do you, even if that 250,000 is like 5% of like the total spend, it's still like, I would say that'd be like 100 times more than some of these other clients, right? Who are like, how do I do that? I think to your point, it would be really interesting. And as we kind of keep our eyes on what's happening with spaces like Facebook and Instagram, and, as we're kind of seeing how cost of acquisition changes, and kind of if there is in an ideal scenario, we'd be able to have some sort of weighted averages here in terms of like being more equitable. Wow. Can you guys imagine if advertising was more equitable? Like, wow. I think we would just see the distribution of wealth between small businesses and large businesses change considerably. But I'm going to cross my fingers on that one to be able to see if that happens.
Yes.
Okay. So some other interesting questions here. This one's really focused on charity. And I think this is something that you guys can all kind of chime in on here. Lynette asks, if a company wants to use a percentage of profits to charity, or community services? Do we need to set up a charitable entity or just donate it to a qualified charity for tax benefits? Also, what's the best way to promote this commitment to community without it coming across as a marketing pitch right now? Manoj, I'd love for you to take a stab at this in terms of, what's better? I mean, do you have any insight? Is it better to set it up as a, percentage of profits? Do you need to set up a charitable entity? How does this work from the legal side of things?
I will tell you that I don't know very much about this specific situation, but I will say that from a cost perspective, in terms of not having to spend money on the formation versus using the qualified entity that you're going to be donating through, may be a better option. If you don't want to spend the money to set up a 501c3, I think it could be cheaper in that way. But also from a tax perspective, I don't know how those things get looked at in terms of write-offs and whatnot. I'm not very familiar.
Got it. Yeah, I think you brought up a good point here, which is like it costs money and time, and you actually have to file the minutes, and you have to be really diligent with 501c3s. I think that if it costs you $2,000, $5,000 to set up your nonprofit entity, just give the organization the money. Just give $5,000 to the organization that you are going to be spending money on. As far as the marketing or kind of positioning advantage, Deanne, especially right now as everyone's thinking about this kind of crisis, before COVID, I feel like people were diversifying their interests. Some were more gravitating towards the environment, some were towards human trafficking, and some were toward, there are so many different interest groups around charity, and I think as a population, we were very, open, and everyone kind of gravitated towards different things. In the light of this kind of crisis, where obviously there are a lot of different needs and things going on, is it appropriate for a brand to shift, let's say? So not even like, how do they not make it? So I guess there's two questions, right? How do you not make it greenwashing? So how do you make it authentic if this is your first time coming out with it, so you're not looking like an opportunist? And then the second part of that is, let's say I'm very much heavily aligned with, child trafficking, and all of a sudden now it's like, I want to start shifting my resources towards, helping people who are in the entertainment industry who are losing their jobs, or senior citizens who, need access to food. Like, what's the right way to approach both of those things?
I think right now, absolutely, these are unprecedented times. I don't think that publications or influencers or your community at large are going to think that it is heavy-handed marketing opportunity. Like I think that people are actually waiting for more of these things to come out. So if you can release this in a timely manner and have it align with your brand in an authentic way, I think it will be very successful. That being said, we're actually talking to some of our clients who have aligned with other charities in the past, and they were about to release for April a charity, I believe it was like an environmental charity, and they actually want to pivot that and donate proceeds to the COVID-19 situation, something that's related to the epidemic. So and I've had some call outs from editors who are actually wanting to see like more charity giving from brands, and like there's a timeliness to it, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that there's but how do you come off in a way that's not inauthentic? I think that's my other part of this question, where it's like, and I think this it's a general question as well, like the authenticity behind messaging. And I don't want to get so esoteric here, but every brand should have some sort of ethics and values and give back that they commit to, either production related or whatever related. What are the components that indicates to an editor or to a consumer that this is authentic?
I mean, I think that's such an abstract question to me, because it depends on, have you aligned with charities in the past, or is this something that seems like it's coming out of left field? So maybe to a consumer, maybe to an editor, it feels like kind of random that like it hasn't happened in the past. But I think if you can get your messaging out there and be authentic that you want to help, and that it's coming from the right place, I think that people will resonate with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the way in which you kind of manage your history, right, kind of helps to dictate your future. Nicole.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that I think also moving forward from that, absolutely looking at your history, but this idea of like, to authentically share why you're doing this and what, like, talk about it, use your platforms to talk about it and be honest. Like, yes, this is the first charitable focus that we've had as a brand. It has always been on our radar to do that. And this is the first time it has been so clear to us what it is that we need to do right now. And so this is what we're going to do in, the short term or in whatever. This is going to be the charitable focus for us because clearly it's needed at the moment. And I think writing that blog post, getting on social media and talking about it, again, your face, your voice, that's the kind of way to just make sure that people know where it's coming from and why it's coming from and who you are and all of that. And so I feel like you could put a lot of pressure on yourself as a brand to like do this the right way. But if you believe that this is coming from you for the right reason and you can talk about that openly, then I think that that's going to be communicated or received when it's communicated in the right way. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion.
Awesome. I think that's great. I agree. I think being honest is something that I think sometimes we think that we have to be more than what we are, when being who we are is enough. Wow, that was profound. All right, guys, let's call it a day. No. All right. Yes, Nikki.
Sure. Yeah, I could weigh in on this. It's maybe not charity, or charity sometimes has like double-edged sword. It can be great and really uplifting, and then it can also be a little bit daunting and I don't know, desperate. But again, from a development, from a supply chain, from that perspective, we don't often see the sales side of things. We're, the Oz behind the curtain. But one thing that I think has always been trending and, and will never stop trending is transparency in your supply chain. So if you don't have the ability to set up a charity or to get involved in a non-for-profit, or if maybe that's just too far of a reach, maybe the charity is more of a message, and maybe it's about now's the time to be transparent about who are your makers, where your supply is coming from, and how this is impacting them, and how important the purchase of this item is on not just you as a brand, but on the chain of suppliers that got you to the place of that product and that sale. So, bringing your consumers in on that, and, maybe just pushing forward and driving forward that transparency model that was already trending before.
I love that. I want to kind of keep it on this line of kind of the sourcing and manufacturing side, Nikki. So one of the things that, as we're looking at reshifting expenditures and how we can best negotiate and take advantage, a lot of this is not just how do we take advantage of our time, how do we take advantage of, what to do internally, work on the business, but also renegotiating contracts and terms and, kind of looking at maybe getting better costing and kind of improving our margins. Are you anticipating or seeing that many of these small businesses today that possibly could not be able to manufacture with certain factories because of large minimums, right? Or maybe being able to renegotiate on costing, given that there's such a tenuous time here. Is there any upside on negotiations right now on sourcing, negotiations on factory minimums? What can small businesses actually take advantage of on the sourcing side of things right now?
I go back to having open, candid conversations. Larger factories that do have really large minimums, which is what we're all accustomed to, you know, they're probably less likely because they're going to be backlogged. It isn't as if these large brands are just going to shutter overnight and stop production. They're still actively working on their collections a year, 2 years in advance, and there's, you know, maybe restructuring or shifting, and they're going to be taxing those facilities, you know, the second that those facilities are back up to 100%, if they're not already, you know, taxing them at their, you know, base level. So it isn't as if everything has stopped. It's more so that we're building up, like we're really building up a lot of pressure on the back end of the supply chain. In terms of our core clientele, all of us here in the small business and the ones that are relying on contractors and small minimums and in-stock availability, again, I just go back to having candid conversations with those suppliers and getting creative with them, seeing what they have to offer currently, and then you know, being candid with where you're at in your process and how you are, you know, how you're able to manage your cash flow and your finances with them. So I guess that's the main thing. It's kind of redundant to what I had said before,
Sure.
but that's really what I would suggest. And you know, we can always help to figure that out further. I think also it's a case-by-case situation, because then there are some situations where you might need to move your supply chain over, and you may need to, like we were talking about previously, tap into some other resources in order to weather the storm.
Got it. You know, what I've been noticing is our clients able right now to renegotiate on contracts, and I want to begin to a few questions here around launching. And, you know, and I think that launching is a really important thing. People are concerned about a whole host of things, and I'll kind of run through some of these questions. But to piggyback on what you said about, you know, having conversations, we've had clients who've gone back to, you know, previous partners that they were looking to retain or work with, that they, you know, are now going back to and saying, hey, well, can you, you know, given the light of what's happening right now, can you negotiate your rate, you know, a little bit further? Can we kind of get better deals on things? And to be honest with you, the sheer amount of unemployment that I think a lot of, or downturn that a lot of companies are looking at, or freelancers, I think creates kind of an economic advantage here for brands that are able to negotiate and get better deals on things that they need to purchase, or contracts or photo shoots, or, you know, things like that, because so many things have been put on hold. And even if that means, you know, negotiating on a future type of thing, that's good as well. You know, hey, I want to do my photo shoot. We're on lockdown. We can't do this photo shoot for the next 30 days. However, you know, by the time when everyone's in this panic mode, you can actually be in this very actively aggressive, like, how do I plan for the summer, right? Knowing that I have this time period and knowing that there's going to be some economic loss on these other partners, how can I take advantage of that and be able to book my event for August, or be able to take advantage of, you know, buying those tickets for that sourcing trip, or being able to kind of do the activities and plan ahead for the things you know you're going to have to do today, while you can negotiate and get better rates on that.
And I don't, you know, like, I look at it as we're all connected. And so where I might negotiate with someone, I know they're having to negotiate with someone else. And so really everybody, we're all kind of being humbled and leveled. And so that is why partnerships, and that word partnership is so important at this time, and having conversations that include that word, you know, and making your supply chain, or making your partners feel like they are part. So not necessarily taking advantage of an opportunity where people are desperate to keep work and maybe, you know, undervalue, but to have a conversation like you're saying about, you know, giving them hope, giving, you know, like you said, reschedule the photo shoot. Don't just cancel it. Ask for a discount. Don't just switch to another person and not give the current partners that you have the opportunity to work with you. And that happens a lot. You know, people are afraid to ask. They're afraid. And so then they just jump ship. And I would, again, I think everybody, factory, supplier, us, ourselves, contractors, service providers, we would all we would all like the opportunity to negotiate versus just being left behind, because I think right now it's easier to work together with your existing customers than it is to find new. So yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
So to
And
shift the oh, go ahead.
Oh, just real quick, I wanted to mention on the side of contracts, because this does come up. You know, oftentimes we can't afford a Minaj, or I hope I'm saying your name right.
Minoj.
I'm going to be calling you after this. So
we all are. I think
Yeah, please.
So an attorney is such an enormous, I find it to be something that is critical for this industry, especially for manufacturing. But as we all know, as a startup, that has to be one of the things that we don't budget for, and that we kind of do. You know, this industry, especially on the manufacturing and supply chain side, is known as a good guy industry, right? It's not all on a handshake and
I was gonna handshake.
Yep. And so there's probably not a lot of contracts in place. Contracts also scare manufacturers. Again, depending on where you manufacture, depending on who you're manufacturing with, they probably don't have, you know, they're living hand to mouth in most cases. 99% of their staff is, a lot of times they're upside down. They have limited access to financing. They're really not that different than a startup. And so you have to think about who you're negotiating with and who you're talking to, and contracts oftentimes will kill the deal.
Yeah.
And so we may not, you know, you as the viewers right now, you may not have a solid contract in place. And so then I go back to how critical it is to strengthen your partnerships right now. Do not burn bridges, strengthen those partnerships, find ways, find creative solutions and ways to really act in solidarity with those partnerships, because what you do now at the small act will pay off down the road tenfold. And they'll remember that. They'll remember that you didn't drop their order. They'll remember that you worked with them. They'll remember that you did everything that you could in order to continue to keep them alive as well. And it will come back to you. It will come back to you in the future because of that good guy you know, because of that. That's how it is. You know, pat my back, I pat yours, and they will never forget. So I actually just read an article on that, a very successful business. I don't remember, it was a huge company, and they went in and they paid $2 million to their vendors in advance. They got first priority, they got best pricing, and they, for 10 years. So one time they paid all of their invoices in advance. Obviously we can't all do that, but the mentality behind it is what I'm trying to get at. And for 10 years, they got discounts, preferred manufacturing. They were treated like kings. So that's kind of where I would say with supply chain, you might want to, you know, noodle that.
I think that's great. I think that's great. I love that kind of prepayment deposit, you know, ensure kind of a relationship there. I also think what you mentioned about talking to your existing contracts and vendors and people, and seeing how you can negotiate with any of them before you have to cut and run and work with someone else. This is a real big time for leadership. This is a time to be able to have difficult conversations. This is the time to be really clear about your needs. This is the time to be upfront and transparent. And I agree that those kinds of conversations are what's going to help really bridge relationships. You know, most business relationships sometimes go through challenging times. They go through great times, like any sort of friendship or any sort of relationship. Business partnerships are very similar. You know, not every day is going to be perfect, and you need to be able to have those conversations so that you can be a stronger leader. I would like to turn this conversation over to launches. I know we have quite a few brands out there that are in the midst of launching. Maybe they were launching this spring, maybe they're launching this summer, maybe they're like, you know, going to launch this fall. So looking at brands who are launching, let's say who are supposed to launch, let's say between today and, you know, looking maybe 6 months out, you know, and I think all of us can kind of put our heads onto this. What are the ways in which we should be looking at brand launches? I had a few questions around, you know, should I still be investing in PR? What role is PR going to play in in my business right now, if I'm launching in the next 6 months? How should I be looking at, will I be able to get the same market share if I'm launching? How do I manage my launch if my supply chain and my manufacturing is off base? So many different components to this, but let's talk about this from the perspective of launching, in the next, let's say by the end of this year, right? How should someone be looking at a brand launch? What has changed within that capacity? And are there any upsides to launching a brand right now in the next 6 months? Tough question. Who would like to start? Deanne, you smiled. You smiled.
Oh
first.
my gosh. Yeah, no. I mean, we're grappling with these questions every day, right? So because we have some clients that are about to launch, or they had planned summer or fall launches, and sort of the outlook of this, COVID-19 crisis and sort of where our lifestyles will be in the fall. Given current predictions, I think that most people are anticipating kind of a return to normal by the end of the year. So I think, it's just such a complicated question, right? Because it depends on what type of product they're releasing, and where the market's going to be at that time. We're going to go ahead and assume that seasonal buying will continue and that people will continue to buy gifts. So that's what we're planning around. For PR planning, just to give you guys an idea, if you're not familiar with the timelines of PR and leads on publication time, we're generally looking at like 6 months out for like important print issues and 3 months to a month for like shorter online. So depending on when you're planning your launch, that's when you would kind of count backwards and think about like when you would start your PR and marketing campaign.
Got it. So if a brand is launching, let's say they were planning on launching in a month, then the advice is to, push that out possibly and kind of not launch in the next month. Is that kind of the feedback, or is it more like, let's kind of hold off? Like if I was going to launch, I guess in the next month or so, how might I adapt to this from a PR standpoint? Like how does messaging and communication shift?
I think you would have to think about like what type of product it is, right? So if it's something that can be adaptable to this environment that you think will be in demand, given people's kind of stay-at-home lifestyles at the moment, then you you build your messaging around that, and you think about, as we spoke about, kind of these digital parties or like ways to launch it smart and online. I think that's possible. Typically, PR launches have relied on face-to-face and events and things that are part of your strategy. I think it would, it may be best to wait, but it's hard to say without more context on like what type of thing, type of brand.
Got it. So very kind of product and kind of category specific in terms of.
So yeah. At least for short. I mean, there may be brands that actually should be launching right now. That are, these things that we kind of spoke about. Ways to keep yourself entertained at home, athleisure, maybe like things that are adaptable to this current lifestyle. But if you're forecasting forward, I think it's hard to say. I can't kind of speak without knowing what that category is, and I think it is. And also, I wish I had a crystal ball so I could like look and see what our life will look like in September.
I know we're all kind of doing the best we can with the information we have in front of us. I think that it's important to remember that, every day we get new information. Every day we're hearing new results. We're doing our best to be agile and to give the best advice in the very moment that we are in. And that moment rapidly changes. And who knows, tomorrow morning we could get a whole new set of information that could drastically shift our businesses for the positive or for the worse. And it's very difficult to know, kind of, it's touch and go. But I do think what you mentioned was very interesting, which is this could actually be the perfect time for some businesses to be launching. This could actually be the perfect time to take a look at your yearly marketing spend and say, hey, we were originally going to be marketing this product in the fall. Now this might be a good time to take those resources and start marketing that product now. I think there are also a lot of different key indicators in the market about how people are looking at this crisis and emotionally adapting to it, not just in terms of, hey, I'm stuck at home, but some people are equating and looking at, COVID-19, and they're saying, hey, well, we also have this climate crisis, and we also have these other crises. And, they're looking at it in terms of a much bigger platform, which means that I think brands that have, are grounded and rooted in messaging that might also be touching on these other facets, I think it's also quite important. Nicole, thoughts and ideas on brands that are in the midst of a launch right now? How are you advising and being present for them and helping them through this phase? What does that look like, do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Deanne said, where it is from one brand to the next. So there is no one answer to this of whether you should or shouldn't be launching. I have been really talking them through, though, if they're planning to launch, in the next couple of weeks or month or whatever in the foreseeable future, and then even further out, that first of all, you have to look at your plan. So you got to take a step back and say, okay, what was this whole launch plan? How much of it can stay the same? How much of it needs to change? What were my expectations for this launch? Was there wiggle room there? Like looking at the numbers, am I okay with launching with slightly lower expectations than what I thought? Asking yourself tough questions like that, because we've got people who are like halfway through a Kickstarter, this is, so for each person, it's very different. But what I have been saying is if you're moving forward, whether you are, pre-launch or you're, in the midst of it, or you're about to do it in the next couple of weeks, couple of months, you're taking the same approach that people who have already launched are doing, which is working on that connection, that deeper connection, and finding ways to build up a bond if you haven't been yet. And, it's one of the biggest pieces of advice I give my startups all the time is that you can't be ignoring that part of it. That pre-launch audience building is so vital, yet so many brands get heads down in production and getting things ready for launch. And then they look up and they're like, oh, I forgot to talk about it. Oh, I forgot to connect with the customer, right? So then they're launching to crickets. So it's like, what have you done so far to build that audience? Is it strong? Can you continue to build on that and make deeper connections with the people you have? Or have you been one of those brands who's so head down, you haven't done that at all? In which case, okay, you need to take a pause and decide, is this really, am I ready to launch then? Because you should be asking yourself that question even when there's not a crisis. But when there is a crisis, it's added. If you've not built those bonds, if you don't have that audience who's interested in you and how you're serving them and what you have to offer them to make their lives better and all that stuff, then you're not ready to launch. So I think some of those fundamental questions need to be looked at even harder with this added layer of crisis.
I think that's a really good point. I think that when we're looking at how that element of community and connection and how people are establishing themselves, it's more of it now than ever. And what actually came to mind when you were saying that was, oftentimes we have these brands that are, they're maybe in Nebraska, or someone wants to launch a brand in Tennessee, or someone wants to launch a brand somewhere else. And what I think is so fascinating is before, a lot of it was access points, right? So how do you build community in your own localized neighborhood? And then how do you also kind of travel to be at these other markets or kind of establish yourself in these other points? What I actually think is so fascinating, what came to my mind when you were talking, was there's now this opportunity to kind of flatten the playing field here, where if you are a brand and you want to start a brand or you had plans to do so, there's a lot of market opportunity to be able to get exposure and to kind of double down and be a bit more equitable with those brands that are kind of on the coasts that maybe have more access to these in-person or live events. You guys are now kind of on the same playing field And guess what? That's a crazy upside, you know, that you can save money on travel and still manage to be at the same playing field as some of your coastal counterparts who are also launching. Obviously, Nikki, there's some huge implications here on supply chain. So we're talking a lot about communication and activation. But what are you seeing in terms of, you know, how should a brand be looking at manufacturing during this point in time as they're planning for a launch? Obviously, so much of this is determined by having product to be able to ship, right? And being able to sell something. And you know, I'm a big proponent of this idea of, if you didn't have a product, what would you be selling, right? What is the emotional driver? What is the connection? And I think Dan and Nicole kind of really spoke to that. But as far as the product, how can we be agile and leverage communication and marketing given this kind of shifting date here in terms of manufacturing?
So a few things have come to mind as all of you have been talking in terms of supply chain. And one thing, I mean, there's just like Deanne was saying and Nicole was saying, there's not a one solution for anything. You know, it really is, you know, a case-by-case situation. But one thing is, and it's related to everything else we've been saying on supply chain, is more frequent deliveries. As again, going back to this revised sales strategy or launch strategy that you have, connect that to your supply chain, connect it to your assortment plan or your merchandise, and then ask those suppliers or restructure the delivery dates and find ways to take it in small doses, like step by step. Find ways to break it down and make it palatable or manageable, not only for you, but then also for the suppliers. Because again, we talk about the backlog, and there are still backlogs, like they're happening now, which is ironic because, you know, sales are down and everything is down, but then it's not going to last forever. It just won't. We won't let it. Nobody's going to let it. We are human beings on this planet, and we are meant to connect and communicate and sell and be joyous and launch new brands and do business. This is what we're here to do. So we're just not going to lock down in our houses forever. We will get through this. So again, I just go back to, you know, get creative, tap into the experts, strategy and planning, as Nicole said, we do that a ton. All of us do. And, you know, tap in, find a way to figure it out, and then carry that message through to your supply chain. Carry it through and figure out a way to have your supply chain mirror your new launch strategy or your new plan of attack. And one of the things that I think is most relevant is just, don't be afraid to launch, like whatever it is that you have. I know there's these ideas of grandeur and the way that we used to do things, right? I can't launch until I have my full capsule collection in 3 colorways so that I can get every single client to buy something and I'm everything to everyone. No, if you have 3 pieces in 1 colorway, get it out. Get it out there, have fun with it. Figure out a creative way to expand your audience. I absolutely loved what Nicole said earlier about how brands are connecting in an otherwise fairly isolating industry, right? You're my competitor. But now it's time to collaborate and really, my stuff, instead of saying like my t-shirt's the best, hey, my pants are the best, but so-and-so's t-shirt is great too. Let's put it together and really start to reach out, not just to the consumer, but to each other, and get creative. And then, supply chain, again, it's like, go back and say, this is what I'm doing. And I'm really hyper focusing on this style or this accessory or this whatever, because that supply chain hasn't dried up or is not backlogged. So let me really focus in on that particular collection or piece or whatever. So hopefully that answers it.
Yeah,
I could go on and on.
Yeah, I think that's important. I also think, as I think everyone realizes, we all are in this together, and it's not simply that one brand is going to have an issue with manufacturing. This isn't like, hey guys, what do I do? My manufacturer is holding my goods and it's holding up a thing. This is a collective global issue. Right. That I think, to Nicole's point earlier about transparency, about the charity also goes to transparency on, supply chain. If you have a launching, you're gearing something up for it, and, you're finding out that things are changing on a moment to moment basis. There's nothing to be shy about in terms of communicating that and being very clear about what's happening on the back end. Again, I think most small brands fail to realize that huge brands want to be small. They try their hardest to be small. They try to be authentic. They try to bring the communication. They try to be intimate with their customer, and they can't, right? They just can't. It's just not the way they're set up. And so there is this huge advantage and upside here to being a small guy. And I think it's important to highlight how, what an important time it is, I think, for the small guys to kind of show up and to be present. Now, I did get a couple interesting questions here about canceled orders, and I'd like to kind of, I know we don't have so much time in the world here, but I would like to touch on a little bit on how to just mitigate business stuff right now, in terms of how to handle cancellations. And do you put everything on sale? Like, is this the time to slash prices and do flash sales? Is this the time to, to worry about the cancellations on the orders? How should brands today be looking at what their inventory position is now, and what should they be doing to kind of help combat a loss of inventory, and what does that look like? Who wants to start?
I'm the only one unmuted. I could talk a little bit about that. So I was looking at some of the chats. How much inventory management is a big deal. How much to buy in against minimum order quantities. And one of the things that pops into my head is just, again, from the supply sourcing end and development end, is understanding where minimums begin and how they break down before they get to the end product, understanding the production process, and then planning against that. And once you have that information and the various types of production and the ways that you can trim back, cut corners, pivot, and restructure, I would say that that's the most critical part of it. And I would be a terrible advisor if I told people to go deep right now. Don't. Do what you can to be as broad and shallow as possible, and have as much ready and available on a consistent basis in order to stand out. That's my perspective on managing inventory and on inventory planning or production planning. And, domestic, again, bringing it back to a domestic or a contractor model, it's an a la carte business model. It's an a la carte production model. So maybe you'll have to buy a little bit more material, but it doesn't mean that your sewer will sew full consumption. So, again, go as low as you can, and understand the different minimum order quantities along your production and your supply chain, so that you can create a plan that keeps you nimble. And the last thing you want to do is not get in front of the consumer right now. Even if your sales are low or they're not increasing, no sales is no business for everybody. So stay in front of them, keep it going. And I love that idea. A lot of our small business clients, they get really hyper focused on season. They get really hyper focused on, oh my gosh, if I don't sell this, I can't. No, regardless of COVID-19, regardless of pandemic and whatever is going on, not to marginalize it, but you can't think one season, one color, one product is going to catapult you unless you're Snuggie into the, you've got to be thinking, how do I take that and how do I diversify my line? And oftentimes we see our clients will like almost put something that wasn't selling. Maybe they're ahead of the curve. Maybe they developed something that's just not quite merchandising perfectly into this existing collection. Pull it, hold it back, re-merchandise it, bring it back the next season. You're not, like that getting to know kind of some of the creative and savvy ways to merchandise and to get your product in front, when to say when to retire something, and then when to bring it back. Those are things that you should be doing right now, not, oh my gosh, I didn't sell everything in 3 months.
So you're saying don't panic at the disco, and it's time to, and you know, put a clear head on. All right, Nicole, you look eager to chime in here.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Nicole said, and I think that now is not the time to just put everything on sale. I think if you can work into your margins free shipping, at least in this time when this is all going on, that can be very helpful to you because pretty much everyone is doing that at the moment. However, I don't think it's the time to just put everything on sale. I think it goes back to what we have said over and over again, which is that open, honest communication, showing your face, hearing your voice. Hi, audience. I wish I could put everything on sale, but what I need you to understand is that I am a small business, and to bring this to you as it is has already, it is not an easy thing to do. And so slashing everything 25, 50% is just something I can't do as a small business. And having that open conversation and finding other ways to bring joy to their life, to bring value to their life, so that you are showing that you care about them, and that giving a discount is not the only way to show you care about your customer, and show them ways you do care, even though you can't give discounts right now. So I would think about that too.
I love that. I totally agree with you. We've had clients that are like, oh my gosh, we have canceled purchase orders. Do we need to put everything on sale? And I said, well, this is the time to really be able to think about, how are you merchandising your collections? Are you able to seasonally bring things back? Have you thought about carryover and basics? Have you thought about kind of where the brand is evolving? And I think all of your points on the communication, but also really just general assortment planning, how much thought has been going into what you are making. I can't tell you how many times I've seen and worked with brands who just decided this is what they wanted to make without even thinking about, like, how does this work together and what happens with carryover? And you're never going to have 100% sell-through unless you only purchase 5 units of that product, like that just doesn't exist. And so I think kind of understanding even like general merchandising analysis of how to properly be evaluating your business health check, I think is so critical, because yes, you guys are correct. It's not like this particular season should not make or break the future of your business. And if you are planning correctly and you set up the right partnerships, you have the right communication strategy, you're taking advantage of what's happening in the labor market, how we can be renegotiating, this should simply be a momentary pause where you have an opportunity to reflect, re-strategize, but this shouldn't be the end of the game. This should simply be, part of the journey is being able to crisis manage in that capacity. As far as, additional ideas here, guys, in terms of, how best to carry it forward, I feel like we've done an excellent job today on, covering some of the major aspects of what to do in this crisis, in terms of, understanding production management and, kind of how to handle excess inventory. One question that did come to mind, though, Deanne, is are you seeing any sort of, is Refinery 29 going to come out with a list that's like all the brands that are on like a COVID-19 sale? Like, is this going to be like a thing? Like, are people looking for that? Or like, are we just totally crazy?
To be honest, people are looking at, in general, and at spring sales.
Okay.
So, it's in the context of COVID-19 or like staying at home and, you want to buy these things. So there are spring sales roundups and also COVID-19 related ones. So
okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is, it's out there.
Yeah. So I think if it's in alignment, if you are heavy on certain items, I think the major notice here is don't slash and burn everything in your store. In previous years, one of the big things was like, hey, if you slash and burn everything, it looks like you're going out of business. And none of you small brands out there should be looking like you're going out of business. So if taking a sale or wanting to engage in markdowns or POSs is a part of what you feel you need to do to help protect cash flow and bottom line, be strategic. Look at what's heavy in your inventory. Pick a couple key items. Take advantage of the opportunities to possibly get published in PR related activities, or maybe having a sale that falls in alignment with spring. I think the idea here is don't don't try to do everything at once, you know, keep a
Right.
very, very level head.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, guys. Any parting words, anything else you guys want to share as we're kind of looking at mitigating this crisis? Obviously, we could probably go on for another hour and a half. I know there are more questions
Yeah.
that I didn't get a chance to ask. But with respect to all of our busy lives being business owners, I guess what I'd love to hear is some more personal anecdotes. How are you guys managing the crisis for your own business? And what are you guys looking to in terms of just business in general, both mental sanity, as well as how you're kind of showing up and taking advantage of this time for yourselves?
I would say that for me, paying attention to my mindset has been really important, and it's been something I've been telling my designers as well, that the thoughts that are going through our heads right now, and those are going to be the most powerful tools to get us through this. And so really paying attention to what I'm saying to myself, and this is my advice to everyone else. What are you saying to yourself, and how are you managing those fear-based thoughts that don't serve you? So really thinking about, you know, do you have a mantra, or if you're less woo-woo like myself, do you have a personal pep talk that you like to give yourself? You know, thinking about those things, because for me, I've been doing it all week, and I have been really making sure that my audience realizes how important, my community realizes how important it is to pay attention to the thoughts you're thinking. And the way I've been showing up is, I think just the way so many, I mean, this idea of just letting people know that you're there for them. So we have scheduled all kinds of virtual co-working with our members so that they're not bored at home working by themselves, and, you know, other online events like that. I've been on social media just saying, what are your questions about what? DM me. I'm sitting here for an hour. I close my book. I will answer your questions. We can have DM conversations. So I think just whoever you are and whatever your audience happens to be, just making sure that your people know that you're there for them. And if you have people working for you, making sure they know as well. That's a really important thing to do, and having those conversations with your team members. And yeah, so that would be my advice.
Awesome. Great. Nikki.
So similar, I guess personally, this past week, I've just been managing high school kids that are bored, as everyone else, and then employees that are petrified, really. Not only petrified for their livelihoods and where I will take the company in the crisis, but also petrified for their health, you know, because we do have a very touch-oriented business. Fittings, we can't do fittings. We have to do them virtually. That puts an enormous amount of stress on our team, because they have to be even more diligent with their notes and their, you know, kind of getting in there. But how I've been showing up is I am thrilled. Like, I am so ecstatic, because this gives us an opportunity. We're on development, and so we are like the little hermits of the industry. We do not go on social media often. We don't promote ourselves. 100% of our customers don't want anybody to know who we are and that we work with them. And so I'm actually in a place where I just feel really excited, because we're going to start to give back and show up in a way that we have never done before. And so I can't wait to connect with people and to be available to people and to help them through this, because that personally for me would feel really good, and I don't always have the time for it. And I'm working 14 to 16 hours a day from home versus what I was doing before. You know, as the founder at 30,000 feet, I'm now like in the trenches, and I'm really, you know, taking every client call and just being as available as I possibly can be. So, so I'm thrilled, I'm excited, and we will get through this. We may not, you know, we may not be eating out and having $200 meals, or we might even just have to be on tuna fish and macaroni and cheese, but we'll get through it. And I'm going to show up for everybody, and hopefully everybody else will show up for each other as well.
I love that. All right, Manoj, self-care. What are you doing? How are you keeping yourself grounded? How can everyone rely on your legal advice if you're not staying grounded?
Fortunately for me, not a lot has changed. I'm doing a lot of these Q&A sessions with my clients every day, just to plan and prepare for the next steps that they're going through. Personally, I meditate a lot. So I have my 20-minute sessions in the morning, and that kind of keeps me sustained and going. I'm on a bunch of different threads with my friends. I'm not reading or listening to fake news. I'm going to trusted resources to figure out how to properly advise my clients, like the EDD or OSHA or the CDC, and getting the real from these organizations that are telling us what we need to do to prepare for the next, week to 6 months, right? That's what's keeping me sane. That's what's allowing me not to panic. At the end of the day, I tell all my clients, don't forget your humanity. You're a human, and just, talk to people, listen to what they're saying, and figure out a way, because that's what you're going to need to do. Whether you have a contract in place or anything like that, we're kind of in uncharted territory. So it's kind of incumbent upon you to have the conversation, talk to your vendors, talk to everybody that you're in business with, because this is not just about business. It's about how can we all get through this together.
Thank you. And Deanne, you're at home with a little one. How are you keeping?
It's been challenging. We have 2 people working from home, and we also have a 6-year-old. He's very active, and he's just about to launch into remote learning. So on top of that, running a business where it's very personal, and our clients we count as friends and family, to just let them know that we're there for them, to kind of echo the sentiments that everyone's, been talking about, like how we're all in this together. We, in some ways, it's been very inspiring to see how we've banded together as communities. And I'm taking some, I'm taking some positivity from that, and I'm looking ahead, and I'm seeing some good coming from this, as well for everybody.
I agree. I feel like some of the tools that we've been using at Scaling Retail have been really helpful, making sure we're all on Slack and everyone's on Asana. It's like these kind of tools that help us stay accountable and connected, and there's something so different about seeing each other's faces on video rather than getting on the phone. Even something as simple as let's FaceTime instead of just a phone call, I think kind of bridges that sense of community. Personally, I've felt this rise to service. I feel like all of us here on this panel are all we're all in service, and we all have this responsibility to be present and to hold space for so many other people. I think all of us touch the lives of lots of people on a regular basis, and the ability to be present, I think, is a gift that we have the opportunity to do. As far as what's keeping me sane has been like working out, like moving my body a little bit. It's like when you're inside all day, it's like going outside and getting some fresh air has kept me really sane. Being able to write, I'm unlike you, Nicole, I'm more on the woo-woo side. So, being able to have a gratitude journal that I can write in, and, kind of sit back and think about where I find some happiness. And, but ultimately, I think this kind of call to action to be of service has been a really nice deflector on any sort of like mental instability that I might have, or freak out, or, getting scared. Like, actually, we've built community. We're here together, and we stand in service for everyone. So I think that is that makes me feel good. All right, guys. I want to thank all of you for your time today. I know it's been a long webinar, longer than most webinars, but certainly a time that really requires us to step up. All of your expertise is so greatly appreciated and valued. This webinar will be sent out in a recording, as well as links to all of your guys' information, because I'm sure everyone's like, holy bananas, how do I find all these amazing people? And how do I get to know them and have them be present for me? So thank you in advance for being present to all the new people who are gonna need you. But also a personal heartfelt thank you for making the time so quickly to be there for our community. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Syama.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Syama.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.